Brothers and sisters, aloha. So I always wanted to do that, and I figured this is a good time. I'm going to begin by just saying thank you and how much we appreciate you all in our lives. Also, I have a bit of warning for you. Allison said to me, Lafe, how long's your talk? Mine's 30 minutes. I said, well, I got to eat. So just know that you're in for a little bit of a long talk. And my mom said, you're not allowed to make this meeting go more than 1 hour because Grandpa Taylor would be very upset. And I thought, Grandpa Taylor is an eternity and he probably doesn't care about it. For anyone else, that's fair warning. You know, I used to tell Delose, Dad, you can't just make those round tables so long. They just kept getting longer, right? And, he said people can listen. And I have some things I want to say about my dad. So I'm going to apologize for a couple things. I know you're not supposed to talk beginning with an apology, but I figured today better be a little bit unconventional. I think Dad would want that. And so, Mom said don't name any names because what if you forget people? Well, I'm going to forget some of you all, but I know that Delose loves you, and if I don't name your name, just come and tell me, and the next time I talk about my dad in public, I will mention it. If I seem a little bit loopy today, I also need to apologize because I stayed up pretty late last night finishing this talk. I had to edit all the swear words. I was really only going to say shit and damn because those are the words my dad would say. And if I was quoting money, it would be okay. But I was worried that I might offend some of you. And so I took them out, but I guess that didn't work good, was it? Let's go ahead and get started. As you may well know, Delose is an artist and a storyteller. You might even say perhaps that he's a magician with words. Delose brought his stories to life, kind of like Schmendrick, who was, in the quest to save the last unicorn. And he conjured up the images from the firelight, making them real and alive, godlike and Homeric. Like all of the great poets who create, Delose brought vision to life in the most beautiful and most true forms that he could conjure. In Delose's blog post from October 21st, 2006, entitled The True Hero, Delose wrote, "To the ancient Greeks, a poet is greater than a prophet. The prophet, the oracle, spouts the words of God, but the poet takes the inspiration of the gods and crafts them into beauty, which is truth redefined." Delose's goal in life was to do that, to take inspiration from God and turn it into beauty, and Delose created. He delighted in the creations of many beautiful things, beautiful children and grandchildren, and numberless friends and family. And I won't be able to mention all the things that Delose created, but I want to reflect on the experiences that he created for us, for each other. In the hundreds of letters and tributes we received this week about Delose, there's one from my friend Mike Dixon that I want to share. He sent this by an email, so I don't think that the rest of you will get a chance to read it on the tribute board. But maybe he also posted it there. Mike's a USU professor who researches experiential design, and he said, "I just read your father's obituary and wanted to express my sympathies for you and your family. What an incredible life he lived. I knew him very little compared to others, but he made a profound impact on my life. I experienced Camp Hall as a young boy and left in love with outdoors and with the way the place made me feel. I think I've been seeking for that feeling for most of my life. My own academic research was guided by trying to understand why the flow of excitement and anticipation followed by reverence and reflection that are encapsulated in a campfire program overlooking Lake of the Woods was so effective in helping me want to be better. It wasn't until I reached adulthood that I realized that it was all crafted, orchestrated, and produced by Delose. I returned to Lowell in the summer of 2018 as an adult scoutmaster, trying desperately to give my troop the same experience as I had. During a time when scouting seemed doomed and my community had given it up on it, he held a torchlight, and gave me hope and direction. I am so glad to still be involved, and I attribute it much to his encouragement. Delose created experiences. He was a master of crafting life, his own life, yes, but also the lives of others. And we who gather today in love and in spirit attest to the greatness of his heart of life-making. Delose, you're an artist, creator, sculptor, a shaper of life. The Germans would say, a Lebensgestalter. I looked that one up on Google. Because when I thought of this idea, I was like, there must be a word for it, and it should sound really cool. And there was. So, Dad, thank you for shaping our lives. On Tuesday, another friend texted me this quote from Francois Maurice, who said, "Love changes us. We look back and see how the people we love make a difference. We are molded and remolded by those who have loved us, and though their lives may pass, we are nevertheless their work." This is not in the program, but I want to just take a second and pause for 15 seconds to reflect with gratitude, to recognize the shape that Delose feels in our lives individually. For 15 seconds of silence and gratitude, just recognize his shape here today. Babies, you can make whatever noise you want. I never was good at counting. This is not, when I was a young at Camp Law, we used to have 2 church services. One down in the chapel was the LDS Sacrament meeting, and then one up at the Campfire Bowl. It was for all the other faith and denominations. Dad led the one that was up on the Campfire Bowl himself, and I loved to go to that one. Not only because it was a little bit shorter, but I also really enjoyed what he would say. And 2 things really stayed with me. There was, in the service, always a moment of silent prayer and reflection. And then he always passed around a hat so that people could make an offering as part of their devotion. Now, I'm not doing that part, but I just wanted to say that I remember that he would also tell the story of the Good Samaritan, and he would read a poem that his dad used to recite about the dream of Abu ben Adam. Abu ben Adam made his tribe increase, awoke one night from a deep dream of peace, and saw within the moonlight in his room, making it rich, a light of lily, like a lily in bloom. An angel writing in a book, exceeding peace had made Ben Adam bold, and to the presence in the room he said, "What writest thou?" The vision raised its head, and with a look made all sweet accord answered, "The names of those who love the Lord." "And is mine one?" said Abu. "Nay, not so," replied the angel. Abu spoke more low and cheerily still, and said, "I pray thee then, write me down as one who loves his fellow men." The angel wrote and vanished. The next night he came again with a great awakening light, and showed the names of whom love of God had blessed. And lo, Ben Adam's name led all the rest. As I reflected on my dad's life over this past week, I've asked him what his blog and my memories of his words, and to me and many of his friends, thank you, Dave, Hawkins, Leonard, Jody, Trent. I really love the photo you shared of Delose reading the scriptures and your description of Delose as a mentor. Lynn and Scott, Hendricks, Dolores Gilson, who I never met, but who remembered my dad as a child in Anchorage. Also many conversations with my wife Diane and my siblings, my brothers and sisters-in-law, and my children, and my nieces and nephews, and for the many students and staffers and friends who have made tribute to Delose as you've remembered him this week. I asked my dad in our memories of him, how did you become this man? this life artist. What was your inspiration from the gods, and how did you receive it and turn it into truth? Throughout his life, Delose found inspiration in stories and heroes from books and from history, and in the many role models he chose to admire and to emulate. He also found inspiration in poetry, in art, and in scenes from his beloved books. My dad loved books because they both inspired and reflected the life he wanted to create. Tolkien and Melville were two of his chief inspirations. He also loved the Wizard of Oz stories by Frank Baum and the stories of Ernest Thompson Seton, Jim Corbett, and J.A. Hunter, stories about men battling with dangerous beasts. I think he liked the stories originally because they were about hunting and living in the wild. Perhaps that reminded him of his childhood with Chris and his parents in Alaska. Maybe, like his parents, he just loved the idea of being fierce and independent and living in the wild. But he also loved this type of story, man versus man-eating beast, because they inspired his courage and determination to battle evil and succeed. What Melville represented in Moby Dick, Seton, Corbett, and Hunter experienced in real life. Ahab fought the white whale, Seton the wolf king of Karumba, Corbett the man-eating tiger bachelor of Powalga, Hunter the rogue rhinos and elephants and lions of the Serengeti, also expressed in Delose's story of Lafe, and displayed in Delose's literal and figurative battle with bears at Camp Lowell. Evil for Delose was the thing that kills the dreams of life, the thing that keeps truth and beauty from being realized, from being brought to life, and from being created. Fear was the evil. Evil was fear, and courage and true love were its antidotes. As Delose became a successful Lebensgestalter, he found other stories that reflected his journey and his craft, stories that resonated with his song of creation. The Boys in the Boat gave him Joe Rance and George Pocock. They reflected what he knew he could do as a coach and as a teacher, and what he gloried in doing. He loved, above all things, to create teams of individuals that worked together skillfully, artfully, and tirelessly, each member of the team pulling with all his and her well-earned might, and all together moving in splendid swing. Today I want to muse and reflect on the works of this life artist, our dad, our friend, our brother, our teacher, our coach, our mentor, our grandfather, our husband, well, mom's husband, lucky for us. Janice is the perfect companion artist and life maker. Delose and Janice work together as partners and parents in this ever-growing family. What inspired Delose to envision the life he chose and believe that he could live that life that he lived, and that he could shape the lives of so many profound and enduring ways. Delose's first heroes were his parents, Jinx and Yorda, his brother Chris, and his childhood friends, and his fifth grade teacher, his gang leader, his guide patrol mother in Alaska, his scoutmasters, Winston, Peter Nelson, and Vern Spencer, his senior patrol leader, Leonard, his merit badge instructor, become tent partner, Sam Young, and his friends from camp when he was still young, especially Mohammed Lester and Hal Johnson, Michael Stevens, and later dozens and hundreds, thousands of others. These people inspired Delose with the desire to serve and accept responsibility and to be part of the team. Delose gave a talk in his ward in November 2014, and the text of his talk is on his blog, The Agra. He was assigned to talk about the welfare program of the Mormon Church, as he liked to call it. The talk, I believe, is a great illustration of Delose's religion, how he sought out and made use of inspiration from God. One thing I love about Delose's religion is that it was very ecumenical. In his talk, he quotes from Thomas Monson, King Mosiah from the Book of Mormon, Lord Krishna from the Bhagavad Gita, Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher, and Thales of Miletus, also from his dad. To me, that is emblematic of Delose's search for truth. It knew no bounds. I once asked my dad for advice about my testimony and some questions that I had I was struggling to find answers to, and he said to me, "The truth does not fear scrutiny and interrogation. Why would it?" After that, I never feared to search for the truth. I never feared, as Delose would say, to live by reason and faith. In the talk, Delose shares several thoughts and memories about his dad, and here's one of them. When I was a little boy, we lived in a tiny house in Anchorage, Alaska. Every morning, I could hear my dad get up at 5 and get ready to head off to work. Interesting, this is a side note, interesting that Delose also chose to start his day at 5 o'clock. Delose's father would have to drive 6 miles through the forest to Fort Richardson. Sometimes it was 40 below zero or even colder. It never occurred to me that he would not go and take care of me. I saw my father living the example of King Benjamin, who in Mosiah 2:14 explains that he has labored with his own hands that he might serve the people, even though he was their king. In 160 BC, Marcus Aurelius was emperor of Rome. Marcus Aurelius was probably the most powerful man who ever lived. He was absolute master of the empire that stretched from Britain to Baghdad, from the Rhine to the cataracts of the Nile. He could have spent his life in luxury in a palace in Rome, but he chose rather to spend his life camped out in a tent and fighting on battlefields in the defense of his country. That was his work. He didn't have to do it. He chose to serve. He put it this way: at dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. What do I have to complain of? I am doing what I was born for, the things I was brought into the world to do. Or is this what I was created for, to huddle under the blankets and stay warm? He chose to get up and to go to work, like my dad, like all dads and moms who choose to do what they should, not for their benefit, but for their children's benefit, and for their, not only for their benefit or their children's material needs, but to set an example of how those children should live their own lives. This is from Dad, from Delose. And from his dad, he learned that work and courage and duty were things you would want to have in your life because those are good things. He also learned to give to others freely and joyfully. Grandpa Conner, Jinx, loved to give gifts and treats and to buy you a tank of gas and to feed you. Often when Delose would give me things, I knew they were gifts from his dad, that he was paying forward. I knew that because he told me that. From his mom, Delose learned to demand that things be done right, and that from his parents' relationship and his experiences in his family that they created, Delose learned that love can be a great motivator. Uwerta was an English teacher. She corrected his grammar. She also taught him to love literature and learning. Grandpa was a hunter, a mountain man, a homesteader, and somewhat of a rebel. Grandma was classy and refined. And here comes Jinx, riding on a motorcycle through this quiet streets of Brigham City, with his dark hair and his brown eyes and his mustache and his wild heart. Jinx swept her away, and it was for both of them a thrilling romance. When Grandpa wanted to move the family to Alaska, Grandma said she would go, but that there needed to be running water and a flush-down toilet. Grandpa made it happen. And what adventures they had. You can hear Delose talk about his moose hunt adventure on his YouTube channel, Folk and Campfire Stories by Delose. There will be other childhood stories in the short feature, thanks to Kim and Allison for making those recordings. In Alaska, Delose had good friends. One of them stood out over time was Linda Templeton, who helped him develop the courage to live the life he wanted. Linda was a year or two older than Delose, and she was the leader of their gang. They lived in an area of Anchorage known as Nunaka Valley. Behind the houses there was a wooded area where they played, which they called the Little Woods because it was little in comparison to the Big Woods, which I guess is everything beyond that. In the Little Woods, Delose and his gang built a fort and they painted it, and it was beautiful when it was a finished clubhouse. A little more time passes, and the rival gang shows up, led by Ian Ishimoto. Ian and his gang took a look at the clubhouse and they said, "Hey, that's our wood. Give it back." "This is our wood," Linda responded, "and our paint, and we're not giving you our paint or our wood." So the gang squared off, ready to fight. Ian knows karate, and one of the henchmen says, "Hey, Ian, show them the ha-ha step." And he did a few karate, judo-like moves with the appropriate ha-ha after each one. At which point, Linda kicked off her flip-flops, which Dad calls thongs in the recording. And she kicked off her thongs, and Delose picked one up. And he ran over and he slapped Ian right in the face with Linda's thong. Then he ran back and he hid behind her. Ian came roaring after Delose, and Linda yelled, "Don't you touch him." The kids yelled again, "Ian, do the ha-ha! Ian, do the ha-ha!" So he did. Ha-ha! It was pretty impressive, too. Linda walks over and says, "You do all the ha-ha you want. I'm going to use a good old American 1-2. And she punched Ian square in the nose. Blood spurted out. Ian and his gang ran off, and Linda was the hero of the day. Delose told us this story many times in our lives. It was one we often requested, at least I always wanted to hear about the gang war. I knew that the story meant something to Delose, though I always thought it was a story he told us because it was funny. And in a way it is, but as I reflect on it now, I think this was a defining moment for Delose. Because it was a moment as a child that he realized, he learned that sometimes you need to be brave and take a stand. Maybe this was a nascent example of his growing philosophy that leadership demands courage and willingness to face danger, standing up for and defending your just cause and protecting the ones you love. Well, when Jinx found out about the fight, he made Delose go over to Ian's house and apologize, and then he made it known with a force that Delose got the message too. And in the future, he fought with words and logic and not with fists. Chris was 4 years older than Delose, well, I guess he still is, which means that he got to do all the fun things in life first. This was kind of hard on Delose, as you can imagine, or perhaps you can remember if you've ever been a younger sibling. It was especially hard when it came to Cub Scouts. Chris got to be a Cub Scout first, and Delose was left out, and he felt a growing resentment. He actually didn't like Scouts much when Chris was involved, and when it came time for Delose to be a Scout, he resisted, and he said he didn't want to go. His guide patrol mother kept inviting him, and finally, one day she pulled up in front of the house and she said, "We're going hiking, and we're not going without you." So he went. And that began his love of scouting. When the Conner family, Jinx and Ewart and Chris and Delose, moved to Alaska, Brigham City was still their home. They visited from time to time, and Leonard Hawks remembered the Conners, and he said everyone knew who they were. Also, Michael Stevens has a record of the primary role with Delose's name on it. Michael's family were good friends of the Conners, and so when Dad moved back in the 6th grade and started middle school in Brigham City, he and Leonard, Michael, they hit it off pretty quick. And Delose and Leonard found adventures tromping through the fields at the end of their street on the west end of 3rd North in Brigham City. The fields there were wild enough to hunt pheasants and ducks in, and there was this old tree, which they called the donkey tree, because at one time there was a donkey tied to it. At Donkey Tree, Leonard and Delose found their own place to be free in nature. There at the edge of town, where the old lake shore met the new farmland, Leonard and Delose found a special place and a special friendship, one that has no end. Dad took me to Donkey Tree one day just after I came home from my mission. He was driving me around a lot of the old sites in Brigham City, the old houses where he and his friends and relatives used to live. He pointed out the tree and he said, "This is where Leonard taught me the facts of life." Leonard was a year older and just old enough that he knew those kind of things. And He knew what a young man ought to know about life, and he was old enough to be a hero and someone that Delose wanted to emulate. Leonard was the senior patrol leader of Troop 321. Delose was the scribe. Delose loved having a senior patrol leader who was older, and he loved having a job to do for the troop that he thought was truly important. His job was to call the scouts in the troop and invite them to the activities. At the Scoutmaster Roundtable on Friday, Delose would talk about what scouting can do for kids. And he would say, some kids sit at home all summer, waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for someone to invite them to come and play. Delose knew what it meant to want to be included, and he knew how to reach out and to include. He also knew what a joy it was to serve others, and he learned the deep magic that the key to friendship and leadership is to give service. Delose had two scoutmasters in Troop 321, Vern Spencer and Winston Nelson. The thing that made the most difference to Delose was that these guys were consistent. They were always there and always willing to spend their days and nights with the boys. Winston and Vern took the troop camping every month. They took the boys fishing and hiking. Winston accompanied the hikers while Vern looked after the camp. Winston had a tough nature and a tough constitution. He was a sailor, a veteran of the war. Okay, thanks, Riley. I was like, we're good, okay. Winston, he taught Delose discipline. And sometimes which was, let's see, lost my place. Delose remembered Winston with gratitude that he taught him discipline, sometimes with strong words, sometimes with a boot. And he also shared poetry and songs and stories, and teaching the boys about life and about service. And Riley was part of this troop. That's Winston's son. We visited Grandpa Winston often until he passed away, and Sean Winston Conner McKinley is named after him. Delose's scoutmaster and guide patrol mom taught him how to show up consistently and how to let someone know when they were needed. Delose shaped many lives by helping us feel needed, helping us feel that we had a responsibility and a duty to others as well as to ourselves. In addition to his childhood heroes and friends, Delose also found heroes and role models in books and stories. Delose met Bilbo and Gandalf and the elves when he was 10 or 11 years old, when his 5th grade teacher in Alaska read him The Hobbit. Delose loved this story, and when he came back from Alaska to Brigham City, about the time he was in 6th grade, when he joined up with Troop 321, Winston and Vern took the boys for a summer camping trip to the Uintas at China Lake and Marsh Lake. They built a real camp in the wilderness with a table and a fire pit. And sitting around that fire with the boys from his troop, Delose started to retell the story of the Hobbit in quite great detail. In fact, as I understand, I think it took several nights for him to finish the story. But as Delose told that story, he discovered the power of incantation. He discovered that with words and with firelight and starlight and with good stories and with friendships and love, he could inspire and create visions in the minds and hearts of his audience. Delose became a storyteller, a story maker, a life shaper. From that time, in the 5th grade, when he heard his teacher read The Hobbit, Delose loved it, and the whole world of it. Thank you, Tolkien, and thank you, 5th grade teacher. How much joy and delight Delose's young heart and mind must have experienced when he discovered there was more to Middle-earth, more to Ea. When gazing down in his mind from the peak of Taniquetil, what a marvelous sight to behold the whole created world, the Valar and the Maiar, in their beauty, the strength and their power to create the world with their singing, and with God, Eru, instructing them. The Aina Lindale was Delose's favorite account of the creation. I imagine what it might have looked like in Delose's mind as he surveyed Middle-earth and laid out before him from the beginning to the end with all the beauty and sadness and with the shining light of hope. The stars' light, the light of the trees, the light of knowing how to make beautiful things, the light that inspires hearts to love and bodies and minds to take action. There in the middle of earth were the elf cities, built with the light and knowledge of the Eldar that they had gained from living in Valinor. The elf cities were filled with art and music, with poetry, with health and healing, with comfort. They were welcoming and loving. They were places where the elder children of Eru Ilavatar, that is to say, the children of God, could live out their endless lives, fighting off darkness, finding inspiration in nature, crafting art with great beauty and power, and living splendid lives in the wild. Delose took this inspiration that he got from Tolkien and he crafted Camp Lo, modeled after Rivendell and Lorien and the houses of the Wood Elves. And we were lucky to be there with our youth and our vitality and our eagerness for adventure and romance. But it was not Tolkien alone that taught Delose how to create Lo, nor did he create Lo on his own. There was also Ernest Seton and Grandpa Jed Streamer, and Winston, and Leonard, and Harvey Mortensen, and Curtis Grow, and Tom Hunsaker, and Hal Johnson, and Mahanray Lester, and all the others, Janice, David, Jody, Trent, Julie, Diane. I can't go on, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stop. All of us, though, that had the chance to be there. Delose included us in his creation of Camp Lo, and that's how he made us feel needed and important. It's yet another way that he shaped our lives. Seton taught Delose the values of scouting, not just the oath and law and motto and slogan, but how to catch a runaway horse and how to kill a mad dog. He also taught Delose about woodcraft and conservation and to develop a watchful eye for nature. Delose said, Seton was my inspiration in all things, in art and scouting and storytelling and in living a life of generosity and service. Seton taught generations of young people how to play Indian. And for Seton, to be Indian meant to be skillful and self-reliant in the wild, to be knowledgeable about plants and animals, to know where to find food and how to track and hunt and how to shoot a bow and how to make one and how to build a shelter and how to build a teepee and how to create adventure and how to accomplish great deeds and how to celebrate those accomplishments. For Seton, playing Indian was never meant to be an insult or a show of disrespect. It was quite the opposite. From his scouting mentors, Delose learned that singing was a central ingredient to the magic of scouting. He learned the power of song, and when he became a camp director, he reached out to Leonard for help, and Leonard became the master of the song. Leonard wrote songs for camp. He learned songs and taught them to generation after generation of camp staff. Delose taught the staff that we must sing, and Leonard taught us how to sing. One of the great artifacts of Delose's creation of camp is the Camp Hall singing staff recordings that were made in Dave Brimhall's recording studio in North Ogden. Delose played the recording for decades because he loved the songs, because he loved the people who sang them. Mike Hopper, Todd Wainsford, James Coburn, John Trent Warner, Leonard Hawks, Curtis Grow, and Mark Daniels. On the whole album, Delose sings one, maybe two lines, but this was one of his greatest creations. This is an example of how his art was, how much art he had, and how skillfully he could enable others. How his art was skillfully enabling the accomplishment of others. His great work is their great work. Their success and joy are his success and joy. Grandpa Jed taught Delose the importance of taking care of those you are responsible for. He taught Delose to give selflessly, without complaint, and to do hard things and the dirty jobs that needed to be done. When Delose yearly put on his coveralls and his irrigation boots and took Jody and the broken off rakes to go and pump the thousands of gallons of poop out of the Kybos. See, I added that one. Grandpa Jed was there with him. At first, Grandpa Jed was there in person, but later he was there in mind and in spirit. In photos of Delose on those pumping days, I can see Grandpa Jed. And the thought of it makes me look forward to the next time I will get to pump the coyotes so that I can be with my dad and with Jed again. Grandpa Jed's sons came to camp a few years ago for the alumni weekend. Ray and Fred and Bobby, and I think I forgot one, I'm sorry, because I couldn't get my mom. She'd already left for the church when I was facing this part. But one day Uncle Ray and I were walking up to the campfire bowl, and he said to me, "Have you thought about what it will be like when your dad isn't here anymore?" I stood with Uncle Ray and I thought for a minute, and then I said, "My dad will always be here, just like your dad is here." This is their life's work, and I can't imagine a God in heaven or earth that wouldn't let Delose be at Camp Lowell. So I'm looking forward to going there, and I'm looking forward to when we can spread some of his ashes at the spruce grove and at the campfire bowl into the lake of the woods in the dark of the night when the stars are reflecting into the water and the boat is floating in the midst of eternity. Then we will put some of Dad's ashes there, and the life that he made will continue and will enlarge and will continue to grow. And we will dedicate Camp Lowell to be his final resting place, and we will ask God to protect it until the resurrection. And Delose wanted to be cremated because this is what he wanted to do with his body, with his mortal remains. He wanted them to be put to rest in the place that he loved most on earth, and this is how he can get there. One day I was driving in the car with my mom and dad, and they told me of Dad's funeral plans and the cremation that was already taken care of, already paid for, and what he wanted to have done with his ashes. And I said, "Can we keep some of your ashes and put them next to Mom?" And he said, "Yes." So we're going to keep some ashes and lay them down at some time in the very far distant future beside my mother. And we will dedicate that ground as a holy place too when that time comes. When Delose felt scared or when he needed to find and inspire courage in others, he would think of Captain Ahab facing Moby Dick, or Jim Corbett tracking man-eating tigers, or Frank Clark hunting a Lafe. When Delose needed courage or wanted to inspire courage, he would recite poems and sing songs. Many of us can recite along with him. Do you fear the force of the wind, the slash of the rain? Go face them and fight them. Be savage again. Go hungry and cold like the wolf. Go wade like the crane. The palms of your hands will thicken and the skin of your forehead will tan. You'll grow ragged and weary and swarthy, but you'll walk like a man. Many of you have probably engaged in some type of debate or discussion with Delose. Perhaps it was about Moby Dick and whether Ahab was righteous in his quest to kill this whale, or whether he was wrong and simply mad. I heard Sean, my brother, and Delose argue this point several times, and I got kind of envious because I wanted to have that argument with Delose. So I read the book myself, and I prepared my evidence, and I carefully laid it out for Delose, and he, in true Delose fashion, rejected it point by point. And the gist of it is this. For Delose, Moby Dick represents the evil that has to be defeated, and Ahab represents the person who has chosen to fight against that evil. Just as Jinx would not be Jinx if he didn't get up in the cold and go to work, and Marcus Aurelius would not be the greatest man to ever live, Ahab had to kill the whale because killing whales is the duty of a whaleman. And to kill Moby Dick was even more important a duty because he was not just any whale, he was a whale who had taken human life, and he was a continuing threat to the peace and safety of seafarers and to hunters. So for Delose, Ahab is the righteous dude, and Moby Dick is the embodiment of evil. To quote Delose, Moby Dick is the fear that must be faced, the evil that must be mastered for man to manage his own soul. You can read all about it on Delose's blog post about Captain Ahab. And also, I think you can see that it is that to be a life crafter, Delose understood that the enemy was fear. Fear of doing your duty because it was difficult or unpleasant or fraught with peril or the chance that you would fail. Captain Ahab fought Moby Dick. Captain Ahab fought fear itself, and this resonated with Delose and what Delose wanted to do and to be as a leader. Ahab quenched the fear in the hearts of those he led. He seized the burning harpoon and he blew out the flame. He showed his men that they need not fear, and that they could fight, and that they would not be defeated, they would not be defeated if they would fight. Even if they were destroyed, they would not be defeated if they fought bravely. When Delose learned that he had cancer, he called me a few times about it, mostly to give me the information. Generally, it was not a sentimental conversation. Very little emotion, as more of a statement of facts as he was learning them from his doctor. I remember one day, however, when we were talking, and I think my dad was discouraged, maybe even afraid, because the prospects didn't look promising. His doctor had told him of the different options there were to treat a cancer and what possible outcomes he might expect. I remember saying to my dad, "Dad, whether you beat this cancer or not, I know that you will fight it, because that's who you are. And if you fight it, then you will not be defeated, just like Ahab." And that resonated with Delose. And I think he took some courage from that conversation, and I was grateful for what he had taught me about the power of stories and of symbolism and of heroes. And I was grateful that I could return that service to him. Another story recorded on my dad's blog is about the night that before Grandpa Conner died. In Delose's words, this is what he said: "When I was a little boy, I would wake up in the middle of the night afraid. I would call out for my daddy, and he would come and comfort me. His presence enough to assure me. I knew that there was no danger, no monster, no evil that was a match for him. 10 years ago, at the age of 89, my father had a massive heart attack, and the doctors kept telling us that he would die any day, but he didn't. So we brought him home to live with us. His bed was set up in our family room just outside of our bedroom door. What joy I felt when in the middle of the night he would call to me, and I would go out and sit at his side. We would talk till he fell back asleep. One night, it was about 2 a.m. and he called for me, and I went to him and asked what he wanted. "I want to go for a drive." "Where do you want to go, Dad?" I asked. Realizing that my dad lived a long time in Brigham City, Grandpa said, "I want to go to Manaway." "Dad," I explained, "it's the middle of the night. You won't be able to see anything." "Yeah," he said, "but I could hear the engine running." Dad, I have to go to work in 3 hours. I promise I'll take you to Manaway this afternoon when I get home from school." He went off to sleep, and he never woke up again. Next to the example of how to work, this chance to serve was my father's greatest gift to me. Delose is a great giver, but he is also a great receiver of gifts. He loved to serve, and he loved to give people the opportunity to serve. My dad was a life shaper not only in camp, but also in his classroom. Teaching started out for him as a way to keep going to camp. For 7 years, Delose was a professional scout, a district executive in Ogden and in Jackson, Wyoming. He thought that he needed to be a professional scout in order to be a camp director. In those days, camps were usually run by district executives. Delose loved scouting, but he hated to ask people for money. And that was a large part of the job about being a professional scout. When he learned that he could be a school teacher and still direct camp, then he went back to school, finished his second bachelor's degree, a bachelor's of science in secondary education, and he started teaching. Teaching turned out to be the perfect profession for Delose. It was a perfect fit for camp, and it brought him the opportunity to interact with young people, where he got to talk to them about things that he loved, and he could help them create the lives that they would want to have for themselves. He could help them discover and value things that were difficult and worthwhile. Delose learned to be an excellent teacher from the example of his heroes and mentors. His mom taught him to love literature, and Delose taught the history of the world through great books. George Ellsworth and Ross Peterson taught him to love classical history, and he learned and taught the ideas and the history of ancient Greece and Rome. Delose loved the way George Ellsworth lectured in class, Full of knowledge and animated with life, Delose believed in the value of a teacher who thoughtfully and skillfully imparted knowledge. In a time where it is popular to complain about teachers giving lectures, Delose held on to the belief that lectures are a wonderful tool for teaching. He believed that speakers can inspire, and that students are capable of listening and thinking and learning, and that there is a proper way to listen, and that it is, of course, by taking notes and asking difficult and thought-provoking questions. And to be able to take notes properly, you must know cursive, and you must know how to organize and summarize ideas. So a lot of what we did in Delose's class was learning to take notes, and we would read and take notes. We would listen to him read and take notes, and we would think as he spoke, and we would take notes. Learning to listen and read and think and question are the most important skills we learned as students of Mr. Conner. We can read dozens of tributes from his students that are evidence of the success of his method of teaching. Delose learned to write essays probably from a lot of people throughout his career, but one professor helped him write a beautiful award-winning essay about the Sidney Stevens Implement Company. And when Delose had Len Rosenband, he was fresh out of graduate studies at Princeton. He was about the same age as Delose, Professor Rosenband was, and they admired one another. And years later, I took the same seminar class from Len that Delose had. It's the one where we were taught how to use primary source documents to write an essay of historical scholarship. One night after class, I told Len, "I think you had my dad as a student about 20 years ago." "Who was your dad?" Len said. I told him, "Delose Conner." "Come with me," he said. And he led me down the hall to his office. Len's office was almost bare. He kept it like that. It had an old metal filing cabinet in it, and he walked over and he opened the top drawer of the filing cabinet, and he took out a small paper notebook, almost as if he had been preparing for this very moment. He opened the notebook, and it was the grade book that he kept from his first year as a professor. He pointed to the list of names, and there was Delose Conner's final grade, A-. Then I looked and I noticed that there were no A's on that list. "Your dad wrote a beautiful essay," Len said. "It won an award." And this is true. And the copy of that essay is in the special collections at Utah State University. So I went over and I read it. And not only was it very interesting, but it was very well reasoned and memorable. Delose wanted students to leave his class knowing how to write an essay, and that is not an easy thing to teach. A lot of teachers don't require students to write essays because they take so long to grade. I remember my dad spending a lot of time grading student essays, giving meaningful feedback and correction. He would usually come to sacrament meeting with a stack of papers and a red pen, and I always thought that was a great service that he did for those students, including myself. Delose was a skillful life shaper because he believed that a teacher renders service to his pupils when he offers them correction. He also valued teachers and friends who would give and accept corrective feedback. Some of Delose's best friends at school, Dave Grimhall, Dave Hopkins, Lord Woodbury, Shalise Marks, Dick Walker, Coach Applegate, Coach Bell, and so many others, and not to forget Paul Smith, his principal. And he had many other principals, and I'm sorry, I'm going to keep going. They were his colleagues, and with them, he often disagreed. In fact, he liked to argue with them. And not because he didn't like them, but because he believed that when you argue, you help each other to reach a clear understanding. Through debate, you will either change your way of thinking, correcting the flaws in your understanding, or you will be able to articulate your position with greater clarity, and you will help your friend correct errors in their way of thinking. Either way, debate is a type of service not meant to cause offense. That does not always mean that it was always received this way, and it doesn't mean that it was always really necessarily given that way either. For Delose, challenging ideas was a gift to learners, and if you are sincere, then you will listen and argue, he thought, not for the sake of arguing alone, but for the sake of learning. like for the Tibetan monks, for whom debate is a form of religious devotion because it leads towards enlightenment. The main point of the Agora, Delose's blog, was to create a forum for debate. That's how he wanted to reach out to the world and to connect with others. Whether through writing or teaching or conversation, Delose shaped lives because he challenged us to think and to be open to thinking. On the last day of my dad's mortal life, he spent the day lying in bed listening to John Denver playing on YouTube music. We took turns sitting with him, and his wife, his children, his grandchildren. My brother Brian and I each prayed with him because he asked us to. We held his hand and we sat with him. I think it's fair to say that Delose loved John Denver's music because the songs of John Denver resemble the songs of the hobbits and the elves. There are a lot of John Denver songs, and this entire week I have just been thinking of the song Matthew, which is stuck kind of on repeat in my head. And the song, it says, "Joy is just a thing he was raised on. Love is just a way to live and die. Gold is just a windy Kansas wheat field. Blue is just a Kansas summer sky." I think it's that line, "Love is just a way to live and die," that has been clinging to my mind. Delose shaped our lives because he loved us, and he showed us that love is a living thing. You know love is living because when it divides, it grows. And when you spread it around, there's more of it to go around. Delose believed the scripture that says all things will pass away, but love will not pass away. Loving, therefore, was his primary aim, and all of you who have received and returned that love, you are a blessing and a treasure to him. You are his life's riches. Allison mentioned his museum of treasures. These are not his real treasures. These were the reminders of his real treasures, because the real treasure is the memories we're making together. You are his friend hoard. He hoarded friends like dwarfs and dragons hoard gold and gems. To hoard means to keep, to treasure, to protect, to guard and look out for. Delose guarded, and he will guard you. There was a day in the parking lot. My dad wasn't very emotional about a lot of things. He didn't show a lot of emotions, but there was a day in the parking lot after he had given a talk to all the camp staff in 2021 as we were preparing for camp. These are all the kids from all the camps. And in the talk, he started to cry. We walked out into the parking lot. I walked out with him and helped him get into the car. And he was in tears, and he said to me, "I have so much to live for. Look at all of you." He did have so much to live for, and thank you for giving him a reason to live. I don't know if Delose was ever angry or resentful at his fate, but one day he was in the parking lot of Layton High with his friend Brad Chappell. Brad said, "Delose, I'm sorry that you have to go through this." And Delose said, "I have such a good life. I have lived such a good life for so long. I think the gods gave me this to make it fair for everyone else." My last thought is this. You guys are waiting for that. My dad did not have to die. Not right now, anyway. My dad was good at living. He excelled at it. He could have gone on living and loving for another 20 years. I really wish that he had. But my dad has passed on. One of my life heroes, my mission president, taught me that it is an attribute of godliness to make everything into something good. It is up to us to make something good of this. May I suggest that one way we can do that is to let Delose's love for us shape and inspire us. Be inspired by the life he lived to live your own best life. Take up and continue in your own great cause. Maybe become an advocate for cancer screening, something that can really save lives. Because It isn't a common practice, and it should be. Use your time to create and to serve and to inspire and to love because you can. We love you, Delose. We love you, Janice. Thank you for shaping our lives with your love. Amen.